What is cache? So that is the topic of this video. Now, before we talk about how cache works, we must first talk about what cache actually is. Now, cache is a small but extremely fast storage area that stores frequently used data so that it can be accessed much more quickly the next time it is needed. The word cache comes from the French word meaning to hide, and that is essentially what it does. It hides copies of important data in a place where they can be retrieved almost instantly. Cache is found in many different places in computing, from your CPU to your web browser, and it plays a huge role in making your computer feel fast and responsive. So how does cache actually work? Well, to understand this, let us first think about what happens without cache. Imagine you are working at a desk and you need to look something up in a book. Now, if that book is stored in a library across the street, every single time you need information, you have to get up, walk to the library, find the book, look up the information, and walk back. That takes a lot of time. But what if you kept the most commonly used books right there on your desk? Now, when you need that information, you just reach over and grab it. That is exactly what cache does for your computer. So here is how it works in practice. When your computer's processor needs a piece of data, it first checks the cache. If the data is already there, this is called a cache hit. And when a cache hit happens, the processor can grab that data almost instantly and continue working. But if the data is not in the cache, this is called a cache miss. And when a cache miss happens, the processor has to go all the way to the main memory, which is your RAM, or even worse, to your hard drive, to retrieve that data. And that process takes significantly longer. So the goal of cache is to make cache hits happen as often as possible. And it does this by storing the data that you use the most frequently or the data that you are most likely to need next. Now let us talk about where cache lives inside your computer. The most important type of cache is the CPU cache. This is cache that is built directly into your processor chip. And because it is physically inside the CPU itself, it can transfer data at extremely high speeds. Now, CPU cache is organized into levels, and these levels are called L1, L2, and L3. So the first level is called L1 cache. L1 cache is the smallest and the fastest. It is usually only a few kilobytes in size, and it is so close to the processor core that it can be accessed in just a couple of clock cycles. Think of L1 cache as the items sitting right in front of you on your desk. And then the second level is called L2 cache. L2 cache is larger than L1, usually a few hundred kilobytes, but it is slightly slower. It acts as a backup to L1. So if the data is not found in L1, the processor then checks L2. And then the third level is called L3 cache. L3 cache is the largest of the three, often several megabytes in size. It is shared across all the cores of the processor. And while it is slower than L1 and L2, it is still much faster than going all the way to the main RAM. Think of L3 as a larger storage cabinet in the same room, compared to RAM, which is like storage in a completely different building. So when the processor needs data, it searches in order. L1 first, then L2, then L3, and if it is not found anywhere in cache, it goes to RAM. Now, cache is not just something that lives inside your CPU. It also exists in other parts of your computer. For example, your web browser has its own cache called a browser cache. So for example, when you visit a website for the first time, your browser downloads all of the assets from that website, things like images, style sheets, and scripts. And then your browser saves those files in the browser cache on your hard drive. So the next time you visit that same website, instead of downloading all of those files again from the internet, your browser simply loads them from the cache. And this makes the website load much faster the second time around. Another type of cache you should know about is DNS Cache. Now, DNS stands for Domain Name System, and it is responsible for translating website names like google.com into the actual IP addresses that computers use to communicate. Every time you visit a website, your computer has to perform a DNS lookup to find the right IP address. But instead of doing this lookup every single time, your computer stores the result in a DNS cache. So the next time you visit the same website, your computer already knows the IP address and can connect immediately without performing the lookup again. So why does